Okay, so everyone, I knew that it was not easy to talk the last, but after also such a smarter speaker than me, so I'm going just to, because we have indeed talked about the data. So after the thousands of data that the previous speaker gave to you, I'm going just to try indeed to make a link with that and to adapt my speech, to avoid any redundancy, and just to show you the view of a company. So no sexy title as well, except the subtitle, which is from big to gigantic data, because indeed that's
what we were missing.
that's what I wanted to talk about. So
You won the contest. Actually.
Yeah, he's
all right, thank you. You're so kind. So sometimes to be the last speaker, give you opportunity. Seriously, so the volume of data indeed is exploding. There's no doubt. In the coming 10 years, the volume produced by all of us will be multiplied by 30, reaching 1 yottabyte. I'm sure some of you didn't know this word, by 2030, which is a septillation of bytes, right? So as far as I know, currently, there is nothing, by the way, that can measure on a yottabyte scale today. But, most calculators can also, even, actually, most calculators even display several that size. So, and even as of today, as we were talking together, the current IT environment that you have, on the planet aren't that enormous yet than, the 1 yottabyte that I'm mentioning. So the time for planning of such volumes of data is coming faster than most of us realize. And, to give some food for thoughts for all of you, I see and we see, an acceleration of this because of what? Because we are entering also, for those who are familiar with this world, in the post-cloud area because of IoT, smart device, machine, and indeed different industry. So IoT is going to transform everything. So when we are talking about big platform and things like that, now the big topics will be probably more IoT. So example of what we have seen, because indeed what is interesting is that now technology, of course, we have seen that, you know that, you are familiar with that, helps you to collect the data and generate usage. But what is new in that now is that data themselves are creating usage. And indeed, and in particular with algorithm. Algorithm is a way indeed to structure the data, and I will come back to that. So the main driver of digitalization, you remember, new usages and technology. I show you some example, of technology that we see. That in particular, in my company, we are indeed keen also to work on quantum computing, and I can tell you, indeed, it will generate again, more and more data. So when I'm talking about, the deluge of data, it's just to say that previously, as we have seen, the volume of processed data were quite limited. Business rules were essentially, and the statisticians were quite deterministic in the way they were structuring the data, in the choice of the setting. As the generation of the data becomes more and more important, the volume of data, as you can imagine, becomes gigantic. New information can be auto-extracted from the combination of data, and Random spoke about this. So before, the statisticians were sampling to define their algorithm parameter. Now the algorithm can be adjusting their setting themselves. So we have the self-learning models. In other words, the representation now of the data is key, and it's come the point for economists and lawyers, because it is essential now to ask you one question: what data is relevant for my business? So, but even in the algorithm, we need to manage also the deluge of data. What I want to say is that you remember that before, most of the algorithms were created by hand, but with the machine learning, I take the example of machine learning because this is in particular in artificial intelligence where we are more advanced. algorithm create algorithm. So the loop is the following. IT application, as you can see here, are generating, data that are used to create algorithm, like recommendation engines, for instance, that you have. That in turn, they are going to fuel new application that generate more data that allow to create better algorithm. The example, it has been mentioned before, is clearly what Amazon and Google are doing. So the question is how to regain, if I can say a bit, the control on the algorithm. Let me give you the example of the machine learning, what we have today. Actually, in fact, in machine learning, we have basically more than 10,000, machine learning algorithms. It represents every year now we are generating 100 new algorithms each year. And in an algorithm, in fact, what is important is that you have three components: the representation, the evaluation, and the optimization. So concretely, what I'm going to show you with the example of the machine learning is how, because in fact, machine learning is interesting because there is a kind of, and it has been mentioned before, a kind of maturity in this market, if I can say. So concretely, we are going to see how, indeed, the development and the select of those algorithms could have some input on competition. So first of all, representation. So representation, basically, you collect the data, you process, you structure, and you analyze. For that, very simple. Before we gave you many examples, and on your day-to-day, if I can say, the multiple businesses application that you can have. So the consequences are very simple. You can improve products and services. You can multiple business application. Because now the decision tree, because this is what you do. In representation, you create the model for the data analysis, the decision tree, or the sets of rules. There is multiple business application, and also you can have new economic models. It has been said before, versus competition law, very simple. The question of scarcity of the data, the question of is or not possible to replicate it, and of course, the question of scale, scope of data collection matters to competitive performance. That's indeed things that we mentioned also previously. Now, after, more sophisticated, the evaluation and prediction. So here, indeed, you have several algorithms which are in competition. So evaluation, it is essentially how you judge, or prefer one model versus another. So in that case, you can have also specific businesses. I will take the example of fraud, detection of fraud and things like that. In that case, you collect, you analyze, statistic, and after, as I mentioned, you start to model. So this is the modeling, indeed, of your output of data. Indeed, you can improve your product and services. This is what we do for certain of our customers. In fact, targeted business application, because in fact, you are capable to target, more precisely the application. And of course, it can also set up some new and targeted economic models. Example of consequences for, competition law, of course, market transparency. In that case, you can attenuate the competition by reducing, uncertainty and behaviors, favorable to price competition. You can also tacit collusion that could, of course, also have the result of sophisticated machine learning. I can give you an example of what we do, for instance, with aircraft, where usually, that's one of the cost effect of that you need to avoid to make sure that you optimize, the use of your aircraft is, of course, the maintenance of the different components of an aircraft. Of course, it's easy now to predict, by pull up all the data. But after, indeed, as it is so easy to predict, you can see that after you can have, in certain organizations, some collusion that could also result of some interesting machine learning that you can get. So that's an example. The last one is optimization. In that case, what you do is prescription. So the idea is that it's about the operational usage, and we talk about that as well, the ability to manage the instantaneous needs, in fact, of the user. In that case, you may have also some different type of application. We see that, of course, in healthcare and in supply chain. So the consequences, of course, what you can do, you can improve the product and the services. You can be, as I mentioned, with more precision, more adapted to the instantaneous needs of the user. Versus competition. Here, this is also probably where the role of competition law, in my view, is very close to, of course, privacy. And this is where, at least, I don't know who should start, if it is competition or privacy, but indeed, it's important that we address the things with a mix of indeed elements. The fact that some specific legal instruments serve to resolve, indeed, a sensitive issue on personal data doesn't entail that company law is irrelevant of personal data. Give you an example. You are on Airbus 380 or on a Boeing 777. No, maybe 27. No? But anyway, you know that for your seats, you need to have a maintenance of this seat, after, let's say, it's just figures that I invent, 25, no, let's say 50 flights, okay? Well, maybe it's probably more. Well, that's what I was mentioning, previously in the second examples that I give regarding prediction. You know that after normally 50 flights, maybe you need to have a maintenance of an aircraft, of the seat of an aircraft. Let's see that Mr. Money, he has a nice loyalty program with Air France, with the Alliance SkyTeam and things like that, for instance. And when he's flying to New York, surprisingly, because he's all the time sit down at the seat 12, 20, or 45. That is surprising. After 10 flights, I'm all the time, at this type of seats. That's because the morphology, and the type of, because my weight, my size, and things like that, pull up intact will help, of course, the company and will help, as you can imagine, either in the loyalty program, but of course also the aircraft for the maintenance of the plane. That's, when we are talking about example of prescription. In supply chain, this is where we have a lot of application already. So, now, what's next? So it just, and again, here, I'm not trying to find solution. I'm just trying to raise problems, if I can say. But what I see is that, indeed, regarding the big data and the innovation, you have seen the deluge of data that we will have. In fact, the level of privacy for me is the true competitive parameters between competitors that will need to be addressed. I believe, by the way, that the data collection, the storage, and the processing, all of them need, I know that it's not only the topic here, but legal and ethics. And that's why I believe there is a lot of opportunity for lawyers, because we should switch probably to a legal by design algorithm. That's really my feeling. And this is at least the way I believe, because the thing is that even if algorithm, we need a triple cooperation, with data scientists for sure, lawyers and economists, and also, of course, the customers. Because in fact, you cannot give to your customer a black box. It will never work, right? So that's why we give the algorithm, but after, indeed, you need to set up it with him. I see that more and more we will have also a commoditization of the algorithm, and that's also very important in terms of topics that we see for the future. One final word, we know, because I believe that there is a good initiative that we are taking in France linked to big data and ethics. This is the initiative, of course, of Cédric Vallimy, to create an ethics committee for artificial intelligence, to audit the algorithm. And I think economists and specialists in competition will have probably indeed to be part of this committee, because it will be probably a need for to make sure that we apprehend, the future of algorithm. However, to finish up with something maybe less scary than what I said before, Gartner actually believes that 80% of the project of algorithm in artificial intelligence are pure alchemy. So, yeah, thank you.